And we're back, people, with the last Sherlock Holmes, Chapter 5, Part 1. Frances Coyle, a Whitechapel prostitute of the lowest type, was murdered shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning of Friday the 13th February 1891. Her body was found by a patrolling policeman in an alley under one of the arches of the railway bridge between Chambers Street and Royal Mint Street. Her throat had been orderly cut. The evening papers carried several columns on the subject, and none professed the slightest doubt that the killing was the work of Jack the Ripper. The police were strongly censured for having relaxed their vigilance. The public warned to brace itself for a fresh onslaught of terror. I read the reports with a weary smile and a pleasant sense of superiority. It was perfectly clear to me that the murder had no connection whatever with the earlier series. I knew who had been responsible for those atrocities after making myself ridiculous over the last Ripper case. I had no intention of being drawn every time a Whitechapel whore had her throat cut, and the press, knowing it was worth an extra 100,000 copies, attributed the crime to Jack the Ripper. Within a few days, a seaman was arrested for the murder, and though he was subsequently acquitted, I gathered that the authorities were convinced that he had in fact killed not only Coles but Alice Mackenzie as well. At about this time, Holmes left for the continent, having apparently been engaged by the French government in a matter of some supreme importance. I received 2 letters from him. The first was a mere conventional note, remarkable only because Holmes was not only in the habit of writing conventional notes. The second letter, in contrast, was of so singular a character that I had better reproduce it exactly as I received it. Nimes, April the 1st. Dear Watson, I'm sure you haven't forgotten Miss Gloria Scott, of whom I told you so much in connection with the Trevors of Domino Thorpe, that you'll no doubt be enlightened to know that she is now staying here, acting as interpreter to poor English folk in distress. We met only last evening, when she told me about the eminent scientist Professor Nemo. He is apparently still alive. I understand he had been killed while developing France's industrial resources, coals, iron, etc. I myself, essentially, am now engaged on carrying on further his research. His trail remains clear. My old tutor's post at Montepella is vacant. A watched pot, perhaps cannot boil, you say. Tell me more, Holmes. But there isn't time. Remember what he wrote. Truth shall run, but not hide, nor escape from me. Poor English indeed, but excellent sense. Yours, Holmes. I was greatly alarmed by the discord state of mind revealed by the letter. A ship named Gloria Scott had indeed figured in one of Holmes' earliest cases, which he had related to me, but no such lady. As for Professor Nemo, not only had I never heard of him, I very much doubted whether any such person existed outside the pages of fiction. But what I found most disturbing was the disintegration of Holmes' normally immaculate style, with the relative coherence of the first lines, to the halting gibberish of the last. All in all, the letter reminded me horribly of the scribbles of a drug maniac. About 3 weeks after I received this queer communication, I was sitting up late one evening in my consulting room. My wife was staying with her aunt. I was poring over the latest issue of the medical press when suddenly the door swung open. On the threshold there apparently appeared a gaunt apparition that I recognised after a few moments as Sherlock Holmes. I was still staring dumbly in shock when he dropped to his hands and knees, scuttered at great speed across the floor to the window. Reaching up, he pulled the shutters together and bolted them. "Holmes!" I cried. "What happened? You look terrible." In truth, I've never seen my old friend so pale and haggard. His features were drawn and lined, so that he appeared prematurely aged, while the trembling of his limbs spoke eloquently of his exhaustion. He edged around my desk, inspecting the room warily. At last he dropped into a chair, shading his eyes from my lamp. "What is it, Holmes? Are you afraid of something? Of someone? But of whom?" He squinted bearily at me. "Did you get my letter? Was it intercepted then?" I stared at him stared at him fixedly. Your letter? From Nimes. Certainly I got it. But I fear I have no recollection of any of the persons you named. Is it they who are pursuing you? Holmes sighed. He drew a cigarette from his case and studied it for a moment, then glanced up at me. I see. No doubt I expected too much. Might I trouble you for a match? I must apologise for calling so late. A few pence will see a pantry window mended, and then I should have it, bared before one of the light. Sorry. I see. No doubt I expected too much. Might I trouble you for a match? I must apologise for calling so late. A few pence will see the pantry window mended, and then I should have it barred before one of the light-fingered gentry avails himself of the same facility. Is Mrs. Watson in? My wife is away on a visit. Indeed, you're alone then? Yes, of course. The hat stand. You must forgive my obscurity. I've not slept more than a few minutes these 14 days. I cannot rest. He will gain the upper hand if I rest, but I grow slow, Watson, and that too may be fatal. Look, Holmes, I don't know what you are talking about, but I know a case of utter exhaustion when I can see one. You cannot continue to expend your strength without allowing the organism to recuperate. Your will may carry you further than other men, but you are still human. You must sleep here tonight. You shall be alone. I will stay up to see that no harm befalls you. Holmes shook his head sadly. Your offer is most generous, Watson, but I must refuse. If you knew the nature of the threat I represent, you would not be so free with your hospitality. I'm cursed, Watson. The house in which I lay my head is visited by evil in the night. But if you would help me tomorrow, would you be willing to accompany me to the continent for a few days? To the continent? But where are you going? He waved vaguely. Going? I'm not going anywhere. I'm fleeing, Watson. Fleeing for my life. We must go where he will not find us. Ha! He will not find us wherever we go. He will find us wherever we go. I strained forward. But of whom are you speaking, Holmes? He stated. Eh? Why, Professor Moriarty, of course. What? But Moriarty is dead. Dead is he? Screamed Holmes in a fit of fury. Oh, very well, whatever you like, of course. It may prove necessary to redefine what you mean by dead, if the term is to be applied to a person who can live. Person. Very well, redefine what you mean by dead. I do apologise. Dead is he? Screamed Holmes in a bit of fury. Oh, very well, whatever you like. Of course, it may prove necessary to redefine what you mean by dead. If the term is so applied to people who can fire air guns, wield knives, murder unfortunates, and drive the foremost criminal agent in Europe to the brink of nervous exhaustion. I was now confused beyond measure. But Holmes, you told me he was dead, did you not? I told you that I had been mistaken, that he survived, and was once more at large. You told me that, but when, where? In my letter, man, in a chipper so elementary, I thought you might even be able to fathom it. The Gloria Street case, Watson, every third word. Oh, no matter. The fact is that Moriarty has returned from the dead and is loose in the streets of London. It is he who killed that woman, Coles, and he would have had more since they had. And he would not have had more since then had I not prevented him again and again to strive to break away. But as often as I headed him off, I tell you, my friend, that if detailed account of and he would have had more since then had I not prevented him. Again and again he strove to break away, but as often as I headed him off, I tell you, my friend, that a detailed account of these eight weeks past could be written. It would count as the most brilliant piece of thrust and parry work in the history of detection. It has left both of us desperate and exhausted men. There was no holding back now, no sense of fair play. There was only the instinct to destroy, meeting its impeccable opposite, and the first of us to give up, give an inch, as a dead man. It is him or me, Watson, by fair means or foul. For a long moment he was silent, his head resting wearily, his cupped hands. Then he roused himself once more, and he looked up at me imploringly. That is why I am here. God knows I have no wish to bring danger to your house, but I am left with no alternative. I need your help, Watson. I need it desperately. Moriarty and I are so finely matched that it is an impasse between us. Your help perhaps will swing the matter in my favour. A week, Watson, no more than a week. Will you come? It will be like old times, so you will come. There were tears in my eyes and in my breast, an indescribable conflict of emotions, as I fervently replied, Old fellow, can you doubt it? He smiled, lay back in the chair. A few minutes later his eyes were closed. The cigarette dropped cold from his fingers, and he was asleep. I went to my dispensary and made up a mild morphic solution, which I injected into Holmes' forearm. At first thought was to ensure that his rest was unbroken. With the assistance of my cook, a muscular Irishwoman, I moved the unconscious Holmes upstairs and laid him down on a bed in the spare room. Having seen that he was comfortable, I locked the door on the outside and returned downstairs. I then poured myself a large whisky, tried to think what the devil was I to do. I was under no illusion as the gravity of the situation. The chipper in Holmes' letter might have got by me, but his controversial conversation code I could now read with ease. I knew whom he meant in naming Moriarty, and understood perfectly the nature of the struggle taking place between himself and the Professor. If Holmes was mad, it was, as one might have expected, a methodical madness. A great mind was in ruins, but in those ruined lives went on. Did he know what he had done? In some remaining enclave of sanity, was he aware of what he had become? So it seemed, and finding the madness too powerful to master, he had grappled with it in the darkness of his soul and thrown it out, and called it Moriarty. Everything he did and said had to be merely observed, but interpreted as one interprets a charade. His words, which seemed a wild nightmare, it literally, if literally understood, made only too clear a sense one was grasped, that everything of which he spoke was taking place within the confines of his own brain. No doubt in my heart I had always known that this moment must arrive. How else could I have found myself so clear-headed, so unamazed, so relieved almost, now that the storm had finally broken? It had been a close and sultry interlude, full of wishful thinking and cowardly self-deception. I had known all the time what had to be done. All my doubts and my evasions were only attempts to deny the grim knowledge. I had known that such things as I had witnessed in Miller Court do not heal themselves with fresh air and exercise. They had to be destroyed. I had known that since the 9th of October 1888, but now I had hoped it might not prove necessary. But I hoped that I might be spared. And now another woman lay murdered, and her blood was on my head as surely as if I had struck her down myself. I found my conduct thus far uncontemptible. I turned from it in disgust. I could not mend it, but I could at least put an end to my vacillation and act the man for once. I trust the reader, having patiently followed me so far, will not now give me up for lost when I confess that even as the 11th hour I could not wholly convince myself of Holmes's guilt. If I were one of our psychological novelists, I could perhaps hope to convey the subtle shadows of reservation and misgiving which mottled the almost solid certainty of my mind. As it is, I can only say that for all I needed just one more piece of evidence, some final spark to ignite the mass of material I had laboratorised gathered for a time was coming when I must confront Holmes, look him in the eyes and tell him what I knew. Such was the man's mastery over me of old. I was terribly afraid that at the last I could funk it if I were to free myself forever of his influence. I needed some final irrefutable proof of what he had become, so that I could go forth with furious dissipation and do what had to be done. I fetched my coat and hat, looked in on Holmes, who remained in a deep sleep, and then left the house. In the high street, I found a cab, which set me down some 15 minutes later outside 221 Baker Street. I had removed Holmes' keychain before leaving, and a minute later I was standing in the familiar front room. Nothing seemed to have changed, except that the disorder was even more marked than I remembered it. The floor was virtually impassable for mounds of newspaper. Drawers hung open and overflowing, every horizontal surface supported as an assortment of objects in fantastic juxtaposition. I stood for 5 minutes, gazing at that scene with a single sinking heart, and then took off my coat and set to work. It took me almost 4 hours to complete my search, but by then I had turned out and shifted through every article in those rooms, and I had found nothing one might not reasonably expect to find in the chambers of a gentleman of eccentric tastes. I certainly had not found the final damning proof I longed for, and dreaded. I collapsed despondently in Holmes' lined chair and lit a cigarette. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. In a few hours Holmes could wake. Then what? Could I let him go knowing what I did? Could I do otherwise, knowing no more? Unconsciously I had risen from my chair, started to pace the floor as Holmes would when his mind was working on the problem. At length, tiring of picking a path through the piles of newsprint, I stopped in front of the tall window and stared out at the bleak cannon of Baker Street, and up at the dark sky, where all too soon the first shimmer of dawn would appear. The truth struck me all at once. One moment I stood gazing aimlessly out of the window. The next I was rummaging furiously through the contents of Holmes' desk, and soon found the small leather case I was looking for. When it concealed what I concealed under my throat, I quietly left the house, walked up to the corner and turned into Blandfield Street. I looked around to ensure that I was not observed before slipping into the mews. I passed the first house and stopped by the wooden gate giving into the yard of the second. It was unlocked, and I passed through the windows of the property were dark and curtainless. The back door was locked, and I got out the case which contained Holmes' housebreaking tools. I had studied my friend's methods on several occasions when he had deemed it necessary to enter a building without the consent of the owner. And although finer points at the art were lost on me, I could force a door as well as any man. In a minute I was standing in a bare passage without peeling paper, and damp odour told of a long period of disuse and neglect. I lit the dark lantern, which was another feature of the burglary kit, and I began my search. The house was in every respect the opposite of number 221, which it faded across Baker Street. Then this even extended to the condition of the rooms, which, save one, were all bare and empty. The sole expectation was the first floor bedroom at the rear of the premise. This was fully but simply furnished. A bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, a chest of drawers, like Holmes' room at 221B Baker Street, to which it corresponded. It also contained a tin shed filled with papers and memoirs. The papers were of two sorts. First, there was the cuttings from the press reports of the Whitechapel murders. They were stuffed into cardboard boxes. The texts were heavily understood in parts and sprinkled with marginal comments and exclamation marks. There were also several bundles of handwritten papers in the chest, tied up nearly every red tape. At first sight, these looked exactly like the records of past cases which Holmes kept in his chest in his room, but these were records of a different kind. Exhaustive gloating accounts of each of the Whitechapel murders, written by the murderer. I burned the papers later, for they were not fit to be read, but I kept back one sheet which I will serve to give the flavour of the collection. It was a short index written in the bold, coarse hand, which letters had popularised the name Jack the Ripper. And now we shall leave it until next week. Chapter 5, part 2. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next week.